so let's see, it is February 27th, 2015, and we are here interviewing Fred Haley of Columbus, and it's Judy Ridner, and it's Michael Murphy. So Fred, usually we start by just asking you some basic kind of biographical information about yourself and kind of who you are and who your family is. So can you tell us your birth date and a little bit maybe about your family history?
Okay. I was born October the 6th, 1944, to Fred and Elsie Haley, fulfilling their wishes for a son. I have 3 older sisters, so they finally got their boy. I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee. When I was 7 years old, we moved to Columbus, Mississippi. My father was a bottler and PepsiCo bottler, and he wanted to move closer to his family that lived in Oklahoma and my mother's family that lived in Brookhaven. So I swiftly moved from a metropolitan area to a quaint town of Columbus, Mississippi. The first thing I remember as far as education was I was attending a private school in Chattanooga. And when we moved to Columbus, I attended a public school. And my first day of school, when I walked in the class, it was full, it was 35, and I thought that was the whole school. But I was fortunate to move to Columbus because growing up in a smaller town fulfilled the needs that I had, love of outdoors. And, I'm a Y kid, raised at the YMCA, summer camps and sports, and still return to the camp. About every week I go out, take Senorita for a little walk.
Yeah.
Little dog that's just adopted me.
Well, that's cute. Now, remind me again, how old were you when you moved to Columbus?
7 years old.
Oh, 7, okay. So really most of your school life was well, you would have just started school in Chattanooga probably
Right.
before you moved. Okay. So what do you remember about Columbus when you got to Columbus?
I remember the size. It didn't take but a 5-minute bicycle ride to get to town. There was a river that ran behind our home, the Tombigbee River, which is now the Tenton Waterway. The people in Columbus are really very friendly and open, and it was quite a change from Chattanooga.
And let's see, so you had several sisters older than you, and your parents. Do you have any memories of how your parents reacted to the move to Columbus?
They liked it. Both of them were closer to their homes and to their parents, and I think they had just gotten tired of kind of the big city life, and I think it was probably a better place to raise children in a smaller southern town, and especially having the river behind the house. That gave us something to do, and we stayed on the river. We really did. Skied and fished and camped, day and night.
Some good time.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Columbus, and what do you remember about what are some of your childhood memories from Columbus, like as you moved from, elementary school into middle school into high school?
Most of my memories were through the YMCA. It was just a 10-minute bike ride from my home. And what it had to offer as far as sports, swimming, basketball, football. And then there was a summer camp, Camp Henry Pratt, which I mentioned is still there. And so most of my memories were around that particular camp in the Y, which was downtown, and where I made my friends and still hang out.
And you went to the public schools?
Yes, I did.
In Columbus?
I sure did. I went to Franklin Academy for my elementary school, and then went to Lehigh, and I graduated in '62, and started my college at Ole Miss. And for some reason, well, my reason for going to Ole Miss was because it looked good on the back of your car when you put your sticker on the back, you know, Ole Miss fit just perfect, and then the little Colonel Rebel. Plus, my father had a law degree from Ole Miss, and my sisters had gone to Ole Miss. But I wasn't a very happy camper at Ole Miss. There were three people that were unhappy that I really knew of. It was myself, my roommate, and James Meredith. I was there. We were classmates, and it was an interesting semester. And then from there, I attended East Mississippi Junior College. I was on a scholarship. I felt kind of bad. I'd blown my father's money on a semester of adventure, I guess you could call it. And I was mascot of the football team there when Bull Sullivan, who was a famous coach, and then to Mississippi State.
Okay. So now, since you were there when Meredith was there, what do you remember about all of that?
I remember having to eat on paper plates.
Oh, now why? I won't put words in your mouth. So why did you have to eat on paper plates?
Well, I think they were scared we were going to riot after the riot. And cherry bombs in the ham sandwiches. There was a sandwich man that came around and sold sandwiches. And if you wanted a cherry bomb in your sandwich, you had to request the cherry bomb ham sandwich. We never threw any. We just mostly stayed up late and went to the drive-in. So there was a little unrest, but it wore off pretty quick.
Now, since I'm stupid, tell me, what's a cherry bomb?
A cherry bomb is a pretty powerful firecracker. It's known to have blown hands and commodes and things. So, for some reason, you were really expressing your discontent by throwing cherry bombs out of the dorm windows. And that made everything okay.
Oh, interesting. I understand.
Yeah.
So, how would you describe the mood of the campus at that time?
You know, after the night of the riot, you know, everybody just kind of got on with going to classes and partying, or maybe I should say partying and going to classes, and it was a healthy mood, you know. There wasn't
You don't think it was hostile? Wasn't hostile?
yeah. After it was all over and Meredith became a student, and you know, my group forgot about it, the freshman group, and I'm sure everybody did. You know, it was kind of like segregation. It happened, and there it was, and you just went on with your life.
So you said that you were unhappy at Ole Miss.
Oh, yeah.
Why were you unhappy at Ole Miss?
Golly, the first thing they did was cut your hair if you were a freshman. Members of the football team would come along to your dorm room, snatch you out in the hall, plug up a pair of hair clippers, and I remember they went through the center and then off the top like that. And then you had to wear this beanie, red, blue with M on it for Ole Miss, and it was bad enough being a freshman and having to adapt to college life without being ostracized. You know? But everybody got one.
So it wasn't just like, you said that you were the mascot of the football team, so it wasn't just...
No, that was at EMCC.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
There were several of my friends that were unhappy at Ole Miss, so we just went as long as we could go. And then, which is just about to the end of the semester.
So you made it through the fall
Made it through the fall.
and then moved on.
Thank the Lord, yeah. My years at EMCC were some of the best years of my life.
Now, can I ask you why? Why so good?
It was a small campus. We had a championship football team. We knew what was expected of us as far as behavior and school loyalty, smaller classes. And I'm not saying that the people at Ole Miss were genuine, but there were more genuine people at Scuba. It was a town of Scuba, about as big as this room. And it was just a lot of student unity. And there still is, as I understand.
When you say, can I ask you what you mean when you say you knew what was expected of us in terms of behavior?
That's right. The coach, Bull Sullivan, really ran the school. So as far as any misbehavior, as far as my biggest problem was I had the fastest car and was holding my speed down on the campus, but he didn't have to tell me but once. He was a gigantic guy, ex-Marine with a big heart and high expectations, and he shared that with everybody. And there's a statue there now. If you ever go through the town of Scuba, you need to go through the campus and see.
I have not been to the campus.
Yeah, well, they're national champions, back to back.
Yeah, well, you're right, because they've been, very, very successful in football. There have been some articles in
Yeah,
national
well, it's
magazines.
pretty amazing because the town is so small. In fact, there's really not a town. It's just the street where the town used to be. And the only business there is a barbecue place,
Yeah, I've been.
which really probably contributed to the success of the sports arena because you stayed on campus. You weren't detracted by anything else.
And so did you live there?
Mhm.
Oh.
Lived in the dorm, sure did.
I didn't know that they even had dorms. That's interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't realize that.
yeah, it was an old building. We had two dorms, the athletic dorm and the boys' dorm, and then the girls' dorm. And if you dated, you had to double date, and it was a great place. It really was.
And it was small.
Very small. I think we had 700 students.
Now, how was that compared? So Old Miss obviously was a lot larger and also would have been very different than your experiences in Columbus. Do you think size had anything to do with your reaction to Old Miss?
No, actually, Oxford is a small town. Not as small as Scuba, but it was a small, quaint southern town. And I think the difference was attitude, student attitude.
How so?
They didn't. I'm not knocking the University of Mississippi.
Oh, no.
Things change, but my own personal experience, and my roommate and several other people from Columbus, and maybe even James Meredith was, it was just hard to fit in, and I had never really cared about fitting in.
Which would make it hard.
Yeah,
Because you were supposed to care.
I didn't know what to do. All I knew what to do was to be myself.
Yeah.
And that was the easiest thing to do at the EMCC.
Yeah.
And I understand it still is now.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is. It really is. I've never really talked about it.
Yeah.
Made some big changes in my life.
Yeah. So now, from EMCC, you came here.
Came to state.
And so what year did you come to state?
Let's see, 62, 63, 64. Came to state in 65.
Okay. Just in time for Richard Holmes to arrive.
Yeah, I would have stayed at school for 4 years, but it was just.
Right. You only had two.
Yeah,
right.
only had two.
And that's it.
They told me it was time to go.
Yeah. And so then you came here, and what was your major here?
My major was education.
Okay. Oh, that's right. We do that.
My father encouraged me to go into education. He saw my love for youth through the YMCA and the camp where I had gone through the ranks, as a camper and junior counselor and counselor, director. I even returned back in the 90s and lived out there. It's in the wilderness. So through that experience, he knew that youth was my calling and led me to major in education, sciences and biological sciences. And then physical education. So if I ever decided to go into something other than education, those would be 2 degrees that would be helpful. And they turned out to be. They certainly did.
And was it aimed at, you would probably be a science teacher? Is that where you were kind of headed?
Well, now this is a secret. But at Scuba, the science department was easy to get along with. So most everybody took a lot of science courses. And so when I got to state and I looked at my transcript,
Science.
I had a lot of science. So I continued that. And then that led me to the degree, and it led me to getting my first job in Gulfport at a junior high school.
Okay. And so you graduated then, you would graduate maybe 67, were you here 2 years?
Actually, I kind of hit and missed. I helped my father in his business, so I'd go to school for a semester, and then I'd help him, and so there wasn't really any hurry for me to graduate. And I really liked his business. That's what I thought I was going into.
The bottling business.
Yeah, because I was the only son, and
Yeah. And they can be pretty lucrative.
it's just sugar and water. Don't
Right.
tell anybody.
Right. And people buy a lot of it.
They buy a lot of it.
And they've been buying a lot of it for a
Yeah.
long time. Yeah.
But my father had great vision, and he told me one time that in the future that Coke wouldn't be the competition for Pepsi, that it would be frozen drinks, which proved to be ices, and powdered drinks, which proved to be Lipton tea. And then he said, the grocery stores are going to start selling their own soft drinks, and sure enough, 5 years later they started selling them. Because it was a real disappointment to me when he told me that he was going to sell the business. But actually that directed me into my calling, which was teaching.
And so when did he sell? Did he sell in the 60s?
Yeah, he sold it in '67.
Okay.
And then I graduated in '69.
Okay.
So,
And then you went to Gulf,
yes.
a middle school.
I guess this is another secret. But in high school, I was never disrespectful, but I was mischievous. And we put an outhouse on top of the school to the day before graduation. Now that's a lot of work. I don't know if you've ever taken an outhouse apart and then hoisted it up on a 2-story flat roof, which almost got electrocuted. And then I also had a reputation of hot rodder, and again, it was nothing disrespectful. Let me tell you, that was for the whole student body of that high school and the schools in Columbus. Those were the days you just didn't misbehave, and if you did, you were dead meat. You know, so.
Because I assume, they did corporal punishment.
Oh,
they
yeah.
beat.
There wasn't any question, and sometimes you would beg for it. Because in high school, you got 3 licks, and then they called your parents. But if you got 5 licks, they wouldn't call your parents. So we would just beg.
For 3 licks and call your parents.
Yeah. And,
Or not call your parents.
and then when you say licks back in the early '60s, and then you say licks now, it's a completely different understanding. You know, we respected the principal, we respected the teachers, and there wasn't any question. We knew what was right, and we knew what was wrong. And when we did it wrong, we expected.
What did they do? Beat you with a paddle?
They didn't actually beat you with a paddle, but they would make you unhappy. You know, you would just bend over the desk and whack you, and they had all different kinds of paddles, little thin ones, great big ones, and a lot of it was just, you know, they just gave you a look, and that.
Yeah.
But you know, we weren't running wild and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just every once in a while, we would get off track.
And they would discipline you.
And they would discipline us. They sure would. There was others, you know, staying after school, writing lines. But don't call our parents, whatever you do.
Gotcha. I gotcha. So were there other things, since you went back to high school, are there other things that you remember about high school? And So obviously for this project, we've talked to a bunch of people we've talked to both whites and African Americans, and we've talked to a bunch of African Americans about what it was like going to a segregated high school. So what was it like, because I assume throughout your schooling, until you got obviously to Old Miss and then maybe EMCC, I don't know when EMCC was desegregated, and then state would have just been gradually desegregating as you got here. What was it like to go to segregated schools on the other side as a white person?
We didn't know we were segregated, never crossed our mind. We were just SD Lee High School, students there. We always admired the black school in Columbus because of their band. They were better athletes. I remember doing the Christmas parades and everything. The biggest part of the parade was the band, with the black band. And so it wasn't any question. There wasn't any like or dislike or anything. We were just all teenagers living in a really good time, the 60s. I wish they had told us, it was going to be that good. We wouldn't have missed a day.
Now, when you say good time, what do you mean?
Oh, we are constantly reliving the 50s and 60s, and in the 70s too. There's no other era where the music is replayed over and over again. The movie stars, James Dean, Rock Hudson, Doris Day. It was just a really great time to be experiencing that, especially in youth. The cars,
Yeah.
Oh man, I had a '57 Chevrolet. It was turquoise and white. Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, right. You took great pride in it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, we were what they call motorheads. That was our group. We weren't athletes or anything like that. We bought cars and restored them and put hot rod engines in them. It kept us busy. It was.
Oh yeah.
It was good.
Oh, yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
Real good.
So what was your sense at that time in the 60s, kind of thinking about your future? What kind of sense did you have about your future and like the future of your friends? And what was your sort of perspective on the world? Did you even think about
No,
such
we
things?
didn't. We was too busy dancing, having a good time, racing cars, surviving school, and doing what our parents expected us to do. And plus we had the river.
Right. Right. Right.
I built a houseboat about the size of this room,
Wow.
and
So there was
we
lots to
fished
do.
and camped out and stayed busy, having fun.
Yeah.
And then all what the Y, had to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. And now, was your family a church family too?
It was kind of mixed. We were Catholics in Chattanooga. My father was Methodist and my mother was Catholic. And then when we moved to Columbus, we joined the Episcopal Church because that was kind of
Right, a blend,
a
compromise.
Yeah, I was an acolyte. Had a good church experience.
But you were not, well, no, being Episcopalian, but you were not a Baptist or, well, your father was a Methodist.
No, religion didn't play a big part in my life until the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, growing up, that was not. It sounds like, from what you said, it's the why, it was your friends, it was the times that sort of structured your life.
I never did understand what being saved meant until I was an adult.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so, oh, well, actually, also thinking about high school era. So were you conscious that, because you're growing up in the 60s where there's all of this, there's a civil rights movement going, Meredith is going to Old Miss, Richard Holmes is coming here, there's all the, the Freedom Summer, Mississippi's getting a lot of attention as this place that's like kind of ground zero of the civil rights movement. Were you conscious of that at all? And did that have any effect on your life?
We were too busy putting extra carburetors on our cars.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we knew what was going on. Of course, as far as the media and, where we got our information, you know, we didn't watch, we were aware of it, but we were too busy to be concerned.
Yep. It just
It
wasn't.
didn't affect our life.
Right. Right. And do you have any sense of your parents' reactions at all?
My father was good to everybody. He had about 20 employees, and black or white or whatever, he was kind and did all he could to help. In fact, the first car that I was supposed to get, he gave to one of the black employees, Mac. I never will forget Mac. He was the head bottler, because if you couldn't bottle the drink, then you couldn't make the money. But it didn't make any difference, And working with my father, the helper on the truck was always black. And, I would substitute during the summer where the salesman would have their time off. And just none of that occurred. We never talked up or never talked down. It's really an interesting interview, because I've never actually put all of this together. Mm-hmm. And what was going on that we didn't pay any attention to.
Yeah. And I think, I think that was not unusual for the time.
Yeah.
That was, so it's sort of interesting to hear that, just depended on kind of who you were and what you were about and where you were and how old you were and all of that kind of stuff. Michael, you've been sitting listening. Do you have questions or anything you want to add? Can you think of things that I've missed before we kind of move forward?
Not anything so far, no.
Okay.
Definitely a different generation. This really seems like history to you, which it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I was doing when I was a teenager, what you were doing when you were a teenager, completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a different. Yeah. In many respects, it's a different world.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah. It's a very different world. Okay. So we got you then to where you got out. You've got your education degree and you became a teacher down in Gulfport. But then you told me too that you taught up here for quite a while.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now get us up to when you come back to Columbus, Starkville area.
You want me to tell you what happened on the Gulf Coast?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah,
because
go
that's
ahead.
really how I got to the 90s in Columbus. I just decided not to teach in Columbus. I could have probably gotten a job there because I had a good reputation as working with you through my wife work. But I had a sister that lived in Gulfport. So I just decided to jump in my hot rod and head south and see if I could find a job. And I stopped in Hattiesburg and had an interview, and wasn't really happy with the physical plan of that school. The whole school smelled like PE.
Must they have a mold problem?
It was, I don't know what, it was just old, And so I decided to go visit Kay in Columbus. I hadn't made an appointment or anything with the school, and I was driving to her home and drove by a junior high school, Bellevue Junior High. It was just right before 3 o'clock, right before dismissal. My father had always told me, it never hurts to stop and ask. Mm-hmm. And that dealt with the Pepsi business when we wanted to open up new accounts. All you had to do was stop and ask whether it was a restaurant or a curb market. So I heard his voice. He said, "Son, it never hurts to stop and ask." So I parked and asked the kid outside what the principal's name was. He said, "Mr. Powell." And I walked in, and the school secretary was there. I said, "My name is Fred Haley. I'm graduated from Mississippi State with a degree in biological sciences, and I'd like to talk to Mr. Powell." And walked right into his office, shook his hand, and through our conversation, he discovered that one of my recs was Chick Reese, who was the director at the YMCA, who made a big impact on my life, as most all men that worked at the Y. And he had coached under Mr. Powell. And he said, you know, if Chick Reese will recommend you, you got the job.
Oh,
He said,
this is also the,
go up to
A
the
different
central
one.
office and
Yeah.
sign the paperwork.
yeah.
So I
Yes.
did. And I had a few courses left at state, and I don't know if this has happened to you or not, but I saved all the hard courses to the last.
Oh,
Kinesiology, math for teachers. Man, math for teachers got me. I remember I failed the exam, and I went to the teacher and asked if I could take it over again.
right.
And I said, you know, if I pass, I said, I promise I'll never teach math. I said, I'm a science teacher. She let me take it over, and I never did know whether I passed it or not, but I think she detected that I had a knack for teaching for kids. So, hey, I passed it, got that degree from Mississippi State, and started in 1969 as a 7th grade science teacher.
Okay.
And then when they segregated the schools, rezoned the schools for racial balance in 1970, they gave all the principals an assistant. So my name got in the hat. Assuming it was through the experience I had had with you through the Y. And either I was the best man for the job or the only fool that'd take it. But I took it. I did. It was a raise in pay.
And you, so you became assistant principal.
So I became assistant principal of Bellevue Junior High. The building was designed for 700,
That's amazing.
and we had 1,500 kids.
Oh my God. And so, and you had just started teaching,
I
right?
just had a year under my belt of teaching science. Of course,
Right.
you know,
But you'd
with
done a
my
lot.
camp experience, I had done
Right.
a lot of life skills teaching.
Yeah. And so,
So-
you were all of what, 20?
23, young guy.
Yeah, it's a different world today.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, it was a different world. Of course, I used the same philosophies that got me where as far as behavior, and we were using, as a teacher, we were using paddling or whatever, you know. It seems such a cruel word now. But, you know, it had worked for me, and then, of course, back then, you know, there wasn't any question about it, wasn't any parental consent or anything.
Yeah. Well,
And-
it was all you knew.
Yeah, and of course, again, there was other punishments too, you know, after school and this and that. So,
So now how come the school had so many students? Was it just, it didn't have money to build schools? Was it a result of the desegregation of the schools? Do you
yeah,
have
well, they closed the black school, so that forced or guided them into the junior high school.
Right.
So we had to have one-way halls, and I had to get on a step ladder in the cafeteria because it was so packed I couldn't see what was going on. And it was something else. Oh, we didn't look at it as a challenge or anything, you know. We just looked at it as this is what needs to be done. We're going to do it, you know. Big deal. It wasn't a big deal. We were enthused that, you know, we were going to get the students from the black school. You know, the coaches and you know, we always wanted to have the best football team. Always wanted to have the best band.
Right.
And that was probably the only discussion we ever had about what was happening next year, you know.
Right. So there wasn't any tension about it. It was just,
we're going to win us some basketball games, you know. And they had a great quarterback, nice, fine young man, and that was it. Right? You know, the classrooms were packed, and well, if we didn't have a fire, it'd have been something else.
I'm sure.
But it was, they brought in the portable classrooms, and
Yeah.
let's have us some school.
And you were the assistant principal who probably, at the schools I went to as a kid, the assistant principal was always the disciplinarian.
That's right.
Yeah. You were the bad guy.
That's right. I was the bad guy.
Yeah. So that would have been a tough job.
Well, actually, it wasn't, because I had worked with unruly kids before at camp, you know. That's probably harder to correct an unruly kid out of camp than it is
Right.
in a school. And we didn't have that many, you know. But I was the bad guy.
Now, do you recall, did they bring over any of the black teachers into your school, or did they really just, because that was a big controversy up here about whether or not black teachers would move into the new schools and how they'd be dealt with, and do you remember, like, did your colleagues change the composition?
No, I think maybe we had one or two teachers that were new that year that were black. Miss Crewell, boy, she was great. And just keep a good staff, good faculty. What, anything news breaking in Biology Junior High?
Yeah. And now how do you remember the students dealing with all of this? Do you have any memories of
You
that?
know, there was some unrest with the students, you know, nothing that really had to be dealt with that much. Fights were about the same. You know, not that many, because whether you were black or white, if you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, that's all that I had to do with all the students, all across the board.
Threaten to
Yeah,
call their
I'm gonna
mother
call you
or
parents, you know.
father.
They were begging me like I used to beg Mr. Lee back at the high school, you know, Battle me, don't call my parents, you know.
Right, right.
And that stayed strong for a while. See, I was assistant principal for 7 years.
Okay, so you were down there for a while.
Yeah. So
And so then when did you come back up here?
I came back up here in the 90s.
Okay.
My mother fell and broke her hip, and my sister was her caregiver, and she needed some help. So I was single, so I could move back up. And I had taught, from being an assistant principal, got back in the classroom. If you want to make an impact on youth, it's not in administration, it's in the
Yeah.
classroom.
Yeah.
It's being a cabinet counselor, it's being where it's like hands-on. And it took a little while for that to dawn on me.
So you went back into teaching then, obviously, after 7 years as an
Yeah.
assistant principal, then you went back into teaching.
We discovered the I Can course, which is based on Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top.
I have
Who
no
was,
idea.
oh, it's great. It was written by Mamie McCullough, who was a high school teacher. And it was all about self-image and motivation and goal setting, and it was a powerful, powerful course. And there hadn't anything been done in education on life skills.
Right.
And so this was the heart of teaching in life skills. If you really wanted to make an impact on a kid, whether, you know, we had elementary, intermediate, and high school, and college level, it was through this book that Zig Ziglar wrote called See You at the Top. So I got involved in that. And then from there, they contacted me and wanting to know who was it down there in Mississippi that was ordering all these books, because we had encouraged the Gulfport school system to teach the course. So my sister and I went to Dallas, and they offered me a job, writing curriculum first, and then training teachers,
Okay.
because it's awful hard to write, to teach a course about positive thinking with a negative thinking teacher. And
Right,
that was
right.
kind of got to be one of my problems, to find someone that was enthusiastic enough to want to teach the course. I'm not saying that they're not enthusiastic teachers out there. There is a world of enthusiastic teachers. But you know, it was something new, and it was change.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And so can you describe, what was this course about? Like, how did you teach? What kinds of things did you teach as a program?
it was based mostly on self-image, you know, a self-study. Then it was based on relationships, how to have healthy relationships, a goal setting, time management. So it was just an all-around, kind of a Dale Carnegie course written for students.
Yeah.
Is the best way to describe it, and it was good. I taught it elementary, secondary, college, and then traveled all over the United States training teachers.
And so did you, you took the job from the Dallas company?
I did.
Oh,
I really did. You know, it was a big change.
yeah,
You know, from getting in my car and driving to school to hopping on an airplane and flying
Yeah.
to
all over the place.
Anaheim, California, New York City, Chattanooga,
Uh-huh.
Cincinnati, Chicago, travel all over the world. Did keynote speeches for schools, telling my story, and it was good for about 3 years, and then airports got real dull.
Yeah, I have other friends who've traveled extensively and they burn out. And it's not even, this is all pre 9/11, so it wasn't even as bad
Oh yeah, it
as it is
was
now.
just getting on the airplane.
Yeah.
And then again, you know, it drew me back to, you know, the classroom.
Uh-huh. Now, what was the company's name again that you?
The Zig Ziglar Corporation.
Okay.
Zig is not alive now. He died about a year ago. He was a great man. And they were based in Dallas. We conducted seminars and workshops and, for all ages. All ages.
Now, do you think it had, clearly you're enthusiastic about that program, do you, like, can you give any examples of how you think it helped, especially the students that you taught in Mississippi? And what effect do you think it had on their lives?
It was life-changing. It was amazing. It was amazing. Some of them were a little apprehensive about, you know, a positive lifestyle because they didn't think it was real. That you could see good in everything. And that you did have control over your life. And that you could make the right decisions. And that you were a good person no matter what other people. We talked a lot about peer pressure. So, you know, there were some that they were so deep-seated in a negative lifestyle, probably it's not probably, it's from the way that they were raised. Because I would see some of these kids from the wrong side of the tracks grasp the information and the material, and then they would go home, and then their parents would call them stupid and never amount to anything. So you just can't overcome that.
Yeah.
But at least they had the information, and when they did get out from under that environment, they could make the changes.
Yeah, I would think that in a state with a lot of poor students where poverty is a big problem, that teaching that kind of life skills could have a big effect on their life. Again, if they can kind of get out from under maybe some of the problems that poverty brings, it may be the way to move. It may be a way to help move forward.
That's an interesting statement. I never really connected poverty to the success of the I Can course. And I really don't think it has that much to do with it. Because it was based on helping other people.
Okay.
Zig would say if you would help enough people get what they want in life, then you can have the things that you want. Helping others helps you. And whether you were dirt poor or from a successful family monetarily, and sometimes that success is worse than being dirt poor, because parents would sometimes teach that you can't be happy unless you have money. And we would teach that money gets in the way.
Oh, I understand.
So that is interesting, it really is.
Yeah, I just wondered, you know, again, thinking about the Mississippi connection, I mean, life skills, it seems to me, are important for helping people get out. You know, it's about self-presentation. How do you present yourself? Like, you knew, obviously, your father had taught you how to present yourself
Right.
as, you know, go in and ask. Well, but that involves a self-presentation of, hello, I'm so-and-so, and, you know how to sort of walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yeah.
And if you're from a really impoverished background, it sounds like some of this would be helping with some of those kind of basic life skills that you take for granted if you're,
Yeah.
if you're raised by sort of a middle-class family.
Yeah.
But it may not be true at all. So
I
you
think
travel.
there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, it seems like the self-confidence, and
Yeah.
again, it's a lot of its self-confidence comes out in self-presentation, which can help you advance professionally, personally. So what was it like traveling for 3 years? And so you had grown up in Chattanooga and Mississippi, and I'm always curious to hear, I'm the newcomer to Mississippi, so I have the perspective as the outsider, but what was it like being the Mississippian traveling to other parts of the United States, and how did...
It was glorious. It really was. I had my 3-piece suit and
Yeah, it was the 70s after
yeah,
all.
yeah, and my hair over my ears,
Yep.
and it was great until I decided that it really wasn't all that great. See, the reason I took the job is because I wanted to get married, and I couldn't, as a teacher or an assistant principal salary, I couldn't buy the engagement ring that I thought was so important. So that's why I kind of jumped out of education and into the travel. And but then there's not much home life when you travel.
Yeah. And so did you get married?
Yes, I did. After I had quit the Zig Ziglar tour, of course they were very fair, but they told me either you move to Dallas or either you move back home. And I had been looking at apartments in Dallas, and to find an apartment that had a garage where I could keep my beloved hot rod wouldn't fit into my budget. So I was still living in Gulfport, just right off the beach, in a little bungalow that was very reasonable. It had a garage.
Right.
So I just told them, I said, well, I'm going back home. I'm going back to Mississippi because I don't want to live in Dallas. I don't want to live in a place where I've got to gauge my life by the traffic. It was kind of a shock.
Right. That was the 70s. I'm sure
Yeah.
it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I flew into Dallas, I was such a country boy. I looked out the windows at night, and there was this red line going right there. And I asked the person next to me, I said, what is that red line? I said, those are taillights. That's the traffic jam. I guess they thought you just got to Dallas, didn't you, boy? Yeah. So, but it was great, let me tell you. Working with the Ziegler Corporation, all positive Christian people. But it's just kind of hard to take the country out of the boys sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And,
after 3 years of traveling around,
yeah,
you sort of said back to this.
yeah, I went back to Gulfport and set up shop teaching the ICANN course and another course called Meology, which was a drug awareness course. Very similar, and I kind of mix up both of the philosophies. It turned out to be a really great little course.
And did you teach that? Was that taught in public schools, or did you teach
That
that
was taught-
privately?
That was taught to 6th graders. I don't know if you ever taught any 6th graders.
No.
They are a lively group.
Yeah.
And I had someone that sponsored me, so I would go from school to school and teach a 30-minute slot, which I designed because that's about the attention span of a 6th grader, maybe 15. And I'm not knocking 6th graders; they're a great group. They are a great group, and so I went to several different schools teaching on the run, I guess you could say. It was good. It was real good.
And how long did you do that?
Did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then occasionally I'd jump back to Dallas and do a keynote speech, for a school. But not to live there, just to visit.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. And so then you were in Gulfport, And then you stayed in, so then you stayed in Gulfport
Huh?
until you came back up here in the
Yeah.
90s.
And then I started teaching alternative. And I'd done some alternative teaching in Gulfport with the ICANN immunology course there was a school for dropouts.
Okay.
But it was a different dropout, man. It was a different kid than it is today. You know, you really didn't fear for your life back in the 80s and 90s. They were just troubled teenagers. And I got to see that evolve from the dropout school to when I moved to Columbus, I got a job teaching an alternative class in a middle school. They were 16, 17, 18 years old. And they were
In the middle school.
in the middle school. And the principal said, now, you know, they're gang members. And I said to myself, you know, gang members, where they got a tree house, they're smoking cigars, you know, throwing rocks at cars that go by. Well,
No.
it wasn't that at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And it took a period of adjustment, and I mean really fast, because I had never taught anybody that didn't fear any consequences. Not all of them, but most of them don't care.
Yeah.
They don't care if they get arrested. They don't care if they call parents. They don't care if they come to school or go to school or whatever. They don't care. And it's wreaking havoc on our school systems. It really is.
Yeah.
Because now I talk to educators, you know, you fear even correcting a student.
Oh, and if you're correcting the student because of what? Just so you can clarify.
Well,
What's the fear of? What's the fear that will happen?
there is a fear now when it comes to disciplining students, especially these troubled students that are gang members. This gang thing is serious. You see these gang signs on the sides of buildings? I don't know why the mayors or whoever is in charge of the city allow those to stay any longer than 24 hours. Those are not kids that are just
Spray painting for fun.
spray paint for fun. They are sending a message to other members and to you too, that that's their territory and they are there to protect it no matter what. And it's, our schools are crumbling.
Do you have any sense of what brought gangs into Columbus?
Well, it's
Is
not
it
Columbus,
drugs?
it's just where there is, the parents have given up,
Yeah.
or, you know, both parents, you know, just, there is a bigger draw for a youth to become a member of a gang, and they are really organized, and they really train these kids. You know, they have their own lawyers, they have their own weapon systems, they have their own areas of town that they control and areas that they need to control. And they take it seriously. They look up to an adult gang member the way a child should look up to their parents. As leaders, as decision makers, as the person that they want to be like. And they are mean people. I don't even think mean describes it. They're dangerous. Really
So,
do.
do you have any sense, you know, from being in the education business then for several decades, a bunch of decades, what changed to create the situation? From the time that you were in school and when you started teaching, where clearly there was a fear of parents, there was a fear of being disciplined, there was a sense of right and wrong, to what you're describing by the 90s where there's no fear.
You just said it. That's what it,
Yeah,
That's
do you have
right.
any sense of why that happened? Do you have any explanation for what happened and what was driving it? In a Mississippi context?
From a Christian standpoint, the devil is really slick. And he knows the weakest point is our youth. So he's clicking his little red heels because it's a success. And I guess it might be the information generation now. There are so many ways to get the wrong information, and it's glorious, Not only through music, movies, and then the internet.
Oh, yeah.
You can take a 5 or 6 year old, can watch somebody get murdered, right there, sitting at home.
Yeah.
And they glorify that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just a lot of fun.
So I would say number one would be the information generation. And then, not all parents, we still got some parents out there that are standing strong. But there's some that have given up. And that's the decline.
Yeah. Do you, coming back to Columbus in the 90s, you figure you left, in the late 60s?
Yeah.
So, clearly the educational system had changed a lot, but what else had changed in Columbus by the time you came back? I mean, what was your impression? Obviously you had visited there, you may not have lived there, but you had visited there regularly. So what was different about Columbus from 1970 to the 1990s?
Nothing changes much in Columbus, and I mean that in a positive way. But I guess the biggest change in Columbus is the beauty. With our Riverwalk and our soccer complexes and our beautiful antebellum homes. The attitude between blacks and whites have changed. Blacks, whites, Asians, Koreans. All people that are different has changed. We don't seem to be able to tolerate each other like we used to. I don't
So
know
it's
why.
not necessarily changed for the better.
Huh?
So it's not changed for the better, necessarily.
Well, no, we don't want to pick Columbus is not changing for the better, because Columbus has done everything that they can, especially as a small southern town, to make things work.
Yeah.
And it's just the attitude that we have towards each other. All different races is not healthy.
Do you have any, I'm going to ask you, do you have any sense of why that's so, like from your own personal perspective?
There's got to be some kind of movement. I don't know what it is. Something underground, something negative leadership, no leadership.
But you recall a much more kind of congenial atmosphere in the 60s.
Yeah. You never really discuss someone's race or whatever, because to make this happen, or this shouldn't have happened because this person was that race, or we were just all people.
That's interesting.
It's the work of somebody.
I don't know. It's it's the $1 million question. But it's always interesting to hear people's take on, well, again, it's the question of why things happen the way they do and why they end up the way they do, and we don't have the answers, but might as well ask the questions. So, Michael, I know I'm conscious of time for you. Do you have questions that you'd like to add?
Yes, actually. I was wondering, when you were at, Bellevue High School?
Bellevue.
Okay. I was wondering, were you aware of anything that was going on in Starkville when it came to the desegregation of the schools? Because there were protests and things like that with...
We're too busy water skiing, going to the beach, and And maybe at that time my age might have had something to do with it, because I was in my early 20s, and you know, the war in Vietnam, and we were aware that that was happening, but we just didn't get involved because there were other things that kept us interested and kept us busy.
And do you remember anything playing out here at MSU after Richard Holmes enrolled and so, integrated the school? Do you remember anything coming of that in the aftermath? That would have been 65, I think it was the summer 65.
Richard Holmes was the first time I've heard his name, so that kind of let you know.
Yeah.
It just wasn't our business, I guess. I don't, and I speak for a pretty big group.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
Well, yeah.
Oh.
So what did you do while you were here on camp? Like, what do you remember about Starkville at the time you were in college here?
It was just a great school. It was someone like an enlarged EMCC, you know. People were friendly. We used to go to the football games just to visit. Maybe we'd win a game.
Yeah, and at that point,
Yeah.
weren't the games, they were in Jackson?
Well, we played some games with Jackson, yeah.
Okay.
It was just, State was just a great place to be.
So you had no sense of tension or?
No,
Yeah. That's interesting.
the only tension we had was trying to pass math for teachers, kinesiology. You know, I don't ever remember much unrest about the war. We were just busy being students and soaking up what Mississippi State had to offer, which was all, very positive.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of positive memories.
Oh, yeah. It's the bomb, Mississippi State. It is so lucky to have it so close to Columbus. And such a great environment.
Neat. Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't know.
So are there any things, one follow-up to something that you said, you mentioned some of the figures that have been important in your life, so especially from the YMCA. So who are the people who've been most influential on your life and its course and your values and all of those kinds of things?
My parents. My oldest sister, Kay, was an educator.
Okay.
A good one,
Okay.
real good.
And how much older is she than you?
She's 10 years older than me.
Okay. So,
We did a lot of team teaching together.
huh?
All the people that I had mentioned at the Y. Bull Sullivan, the coach at EMCC. We could talk about it for days. Good, manly, Christian men who looked after me at the time and who guided me. They really didn't have to sit down and give me a talk or anything. It was just their lifestyle. It's just the
Lead
way,
by example,
Oh,
follow
yeah.
by example,
Oh, yeah.
or role model by
Just-
example.
just the way that they were.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so now, were your parents college educated? Oh, your father had a law degree.
Had a law degree.
Yeah. And was your mom college educated?
She went to Ole Miss.
Okay.
And
That's right. Forget it.
she graduated, but I don't know in what. She was just a good mom.
Yeah. Now, how did your parents, since you have at least two siblings, you and your siblings, so there's two siblings in your family, two kids in your family who became teachers. Do you think, was that, I know you said your father influenced your decision to become a teacher. What about your sister? Was there something in your family that just encouraged members of your family to become educators?
No, Kay and I just believed in youth. And that's what guided us to education. And I don't really believe, I was somewhat of a soloist as a child, having three sisters older.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't mind it, you know. I could tell you every battlefield site on Missionary Ridge in Chattanooga. And then when we moved to Columbus, you know, I mentioned the river several times and bicycling through town. And so I don't think there was. I think it's just the way that God planned our lives.
And so now I know you're the caretaker at Riverview,
Huh?
but then you run an antiques business
Oh,
too. don't you?
yeah. There was
Yeah.
another engagement ring deal at a friend named Trader Smith that had a Sanford and Son set up in Long Beach, which was just right outside of Gulfport. And he was making a killing. And I said, you know, I can do the same thing. All I got to do is find a place to buy this stuff. So we became friends, and we'd go to New Orleans and buy it and haul it over to Long Beach and fix it up, and then the people from New Orleans would come over on the weekends and buy it, and we'd haul it back. It was a pretty good deal. And that's back in the golden era.
So you refinish furniture and all that
Oh yeah, we'd buy it in need of repair and
Yeah.
repair it, and you could either sell it wholesale or retail when you did like that. So I brought that gift to Columbus and just happened to fall into this little general store.
Yeah, you said it's
Building,
called the farmer's
yeah.
market.
Yeah, across from the farmer's market. It's really neat. Filled with kids, you know. During soccer season, kids come over
Oh,
and
really?
ramble through. My place is kind of a Sanford and Son setup. Not by choice, I'm telling you. Because I really do like fine furniture like you saw at Riverview. But antiques are taking a rest.
Yeah.
And this refurbishing craze, which is, when you think about it, you know, it's on television, it's on the internet, you know, Pinterest, Facebook, and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
But when I used to sell an armoire for $1,200, I'd pay $200 for it and fix it up. We call those big hits.
Yeah.
Now I buy a door or a window for $5 or $10 and sell it for 15 or 20.
Right.
15 or 20.
Doesn't add up so fast.
But it's still, you know,
Right.
it's a good group. So, you know, you gotta go with the times, just like education.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for about an hour and a half, and
Well,
I'm
that
conscious
was
of
really
time.
fast.
So, are there any last things that you think that you'd like to say on the record, or that we haven't covered that you want to talk about, or any other things that?
No, I have talked about things that I had never really placed it, you know, until this interview, and I appreciate y'all taking your time to do
Oh
this.
yeah, well, it's always interesting to talk to people. It's, so we can probably, why don't we turn?
Let me say one more thing, because a lot of this is my opinion,
Oh yeah.
and I have been wrong
Oh yeah.
several times in my life. I try to make new mistakes. This is one thing that we would teach in the ICANN course. It's okay to make mistakes, but you need to make new mistakes. Don't make the same ones over and over. And I said some things about gangs, and that it's just from my own personal experience, whether it's really happening or not. I just know from my experience that it's something you need to know about and think it through, and get your own opinion about, as far as it's affecting our schools and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, I understand.
Okay.
Okay.